you know how this works, but I'll sort of give some insight into into this for your viewers and your listeners. Okay, so I have said publicly, I've been attacked by this from the left. I've said, look, Kamala's own internal polls are not very good right now. And of course, the lefties say, well, J.D. Vance is the VP candidate for Republicans. Nobody in Kamala Harris's campaign is talking to him. And that's right, by the way. Kamala Harris's campaign is not talking to me. But they are talking to journalists.
Yeah.
And then those journalists want insights into what's going on with the Republican ticket. They want to see our internal numbers.
Yeah.
And look, the journalists are telling me that Kamala Harris doesn't like her numbers. The journalists are telling me our campaign does like their numbers. There's a consistency of story here.
Journalists act as kind of like it's an information.
They're like the intelligence operatives, right? Like
totally true. And in fact, some of them are working for intelligence operatives.
Right. Yeah, journalists are to electoral politics what like the CIA is to international relations.
True. People think, just like in polling, they think, oh, polls are designed to measure what people think. Journalists are designed to report what happened. No. Journalists are players in the political system.
Yes.
And they do not disclose that to their readers, and you see it up close. But it's interesting. They play the role of kind of like covert diplomats between the campaigns.
Yes, they do. Yeah, and I'll tell you, I mean, in 2016, what the journalists were telling you was Hillary Clinton's campaign is confident, but then some of them, like Bill Clinton, were very not confident.
Yeah.
And in 2020, they were saying nobody really knows what's going on. And in 2024, they're saying Kamala Harris is feeling a little bit rough about her chances. Yes. The Trump people are feeling good about their chances. Look, I think we're in a good spot, but you can't take this stuff for granted, right? And by the way, I think this goes in both ways, right? If you take two rows of a picture, you can get demotivated. If you take too pessimistic of a picture, you can get demotivated. Excuse me, we still have to do our job. We have to go out there, persuade voters. We have to go out there, knock on doors. If you're watching this and you want to get involved in the campaign, like go and do it. Go to donaldjtrump.com, volunteer, become a door knocker, because we actually can win this race. I think we will win this race, but not if we sit on our asses and don't get out there and work.
I think Vance is absolutely right. And he actually exposed some more insider information to Tucker Carlson, which I'll share in a moment. But the reason I wanted to make this video is because a slew of polls have come out today, and they've all been favorable for Kamala Harris and really bad for Donald Trump. And you guys know me, I love data, I love numbers, but when I was taking a close look at these polls, the numbers themselves did not match up. They did not line up. Something fishy is going on and something doesn't make sense. And let me prove it to you. Here is an example. Gallup, which obviously is well known, a household name when it comes to polling. Gallup found that not only is Donald Trump more popular today than he's ever been, he has a 46% favorability rating, he's actually more popular, more favorable than Kamala Harris, which she currently stands at 44%. And the inverse is also true. Kamala Harris is more unpopular. She has a higher unfavorability rating of 54% compared to Trump's 53%. So Trump is more popular, Kamala Harris is more unpopular, and yet the polls show Kamala Harris winning. Like, it doesn't add up. And when you take a closer look at the numbers, the same thing holds. For example, yesterday, Donald Trump was in New York. He made the claim that he's going to fight to win New York. Well, the polls, this actually just came out yesterday from the New York Times, showing that Donald Trump is winning the Jewish vote in New York. You'll notice in the middle box, close to the top, Donald Trump with 54% of the Jewish vote compared to 44% of the Jewish vote. That is a huge turnaround for Donald Trump. But not only is that a big turnaround, what is really eye-opening is at the bottom half of this data are the undecideds. The last few row are undecideds. And it says, if you had to choose today, who would you vote for? And among the undecided Jewish voters, they went 76% to 0% for Kamala Harris against Donald Trump. What are the odds of that among undecided voters when, the rest of the Jewish population in New York has split for Donald Trump? So there are a lot of numbers that don't make sense. You consider he's now winning the Jewish vote in New York. Donald Trump has the highest share of the black vote among any Republican, the highest share of the Hispanic vote, Asian vote. You can go down the list, and yet somehow Trump is behind in all these states. I'll do one more. Yesterday, the Teamsters straw poll was revealed. Before Joe Biden dropped out, he was leading Trump by 8 points, 44.3% to 36.3%. And then when Biden dropped out and now they swapped in Kamala Harris, all of a sudden Trump is leading by 27 points, 58 to 31%. Teamsters membership is 1.5 million members all over the U.S., especially in northern states, especially in Rust Belt states. Hugely concentrated in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. And somehow, we're supposed to believe that Trump has made all these inroads, and yet somehow the polls show Kamala Harris on top. There is something fishy going on with the polls here, and I can't quite, there really is no way to explain those discrepancies unless what J.D. Vance is saying is correct. Now, J.D. made a great point about, who is putting together these polls and what are their goals.
The same people who put those public opinion polls together are the same people who say, for example, that Donald Trump was going to lose Wisconsin by 17 points. Remember that? 3 days before the 2020 election, Donald Trump was supposed to lose Wisconsin by 17 points. And set to the side all of the debates about what happened in 2020, Wisconsin was basically a tied election. So these guys use public polls, they use the media, not even just to manipulate public opinion, but to manipulate our leadership about what public opinion actually says.
So how does that happen? So those polls are fake, is what you're saying?
Oh, absolutely, they're fake. They're absolutely fake. And we see this, again, this is like very nerdy, but let's go down this polling rabbit hole, okay? So a friend of mine, I think, is the best pollster in America. Every race I've ever seen him poll, he's way better than anybody else, okay? So good pollster versus a standard media pollster. Fabrizio. Tony Fabrizio, great guy. He's the president's pollster, okay? Take a standard media poll and ask yourself, what are they doing? Those polls are all conducted by what's called online panels. In other words, they have a group of people that they go to again and again and again. They ask their opinion. Well, who are the people who are going to respond aggressively to online panels about what they feel about every issue of the day? A bunch of highly engaged, typically far left, typically people with professional degrees, people who are not representative of the American people at large, right? Meanwhile, most Americans are trying to pay their mortgage and trying to take care of their kids and trying to do all the things that are necessary to live a life in this country. And they're not answering the phone when a pollster picks up. So if you actually look at the good pollsters, they're telling you a radically different story because they're talking to a representative sample of the United States. And the fake media pollsters are talking to a very narrow slice of the United States. And again, they're trying to sell us a story. And this is not primarily to manipulate the American people. I think it's to manipulate us, meaning elected officials. Because I've sat in lunches with a number of my colleagues who will say, look at this poll and look how Americans are responding to this or that issue. And then you realize that that exact same poll was wildly inaccurate 2 years ago. Why are you making your judgments about what the American people believe based on some poll? And oh, by the way, why don't you express some leadership? Why don't you just actually have a view and go to the American people and try to persuade them that your view is wise and then enact legislation in accordance with that wisdom, right? That's how real leadership should work.
What's so deceptive, and I think what people don't realize is that a lot of these polls are designed not to measure opinion, but to shape it.
Yes.
So they are tools of influence.
100%. President Trump said this recently in an interview, where he said that the purpose of some of these polls that say, okay, you're down 17 points in Wisconsin. So say you're a Republican voter, you want to support Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. And of course, the polls now are much better for us than they were back in 2020. But let's say you want to support President Trump and you read a story that says he's down by 17 points in Wisconsin. Why even show up, right? So there's a voter suppression dynamic here where you try to get people to get depressed and to drop out of the democratic process. Don't even go and vote if the president is down by so much. The purpose of these polls is actually manipulation of both the public themselves, but also, of course, elected officials. And I think that we have to have the courage to trust our own convictions, to say, screw you, I don't buy the polls, and to do what you think is right on behalf of the country.
What's really interesting about this election is I think this is really the first election that's going to be pitting traditional media, the old guard, versus independent media, the new guard. And you take a look at what the Trump-Vance campaign is doing. Yes, they are granting interviews to traditional mainstream corporate media outlets, but they're also going on the road with Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Joe Rogan, and all these other podcasters and alternative media influencers, alternative media voices. And it's very exciting because I think it'll show a new way forward for how candidates, leaders, and patriots can really speak directly to the American people and bypass the corporate media filter that they try to impose on our politicians. Now, what's really interesting here is Kamala Harris doesn't have a lot of campaign events listed on her website. Now, if what J.D. Vance is saying is true, then my belief is that this will reflect in Harris's schedule, right? If she really is unsure about her polling numbers, if she, is less rosy internally than the campaign is publicly putting out there, then she's going to be going to more blue states. And that's exactly what her campaign is showing. Now, her website obviously is a mess, very little on it. So I got this from USA Today. Now, they did leave something out. She is going to Georgia tomorrow, September 20th, so they left that out. But the two other stops on the schedule for this week are Michigan and Wisconsin, both of which are, if the polls are correct, supposed to be barely blue right now. You would think she'd want to go on the offense even more in Pennsylvania, in Arizona, in North Carolina. But it appears that Kamala is playing defense. I get playing defense in Michigan and Pennsylvania, but Wisconsin? Really? So the fact that she's going to Wisconsin really betrays maybe how the campaign is actually feeling. And then the inverse again is true. Donald Trump yesterday went to New York. What does the Trump campaign know about New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania that they're not telling the public? And here's why I think, even if people think New York is far-fetched, and, I do realize it's far-fetched, and I personally believe that, but Trump has every single motivation to want to win this. And forget about the presidency. We forget all about this lawfare that's happened against them just because the trials and the sentencing in the New York case have been put on pause or delayed, right? This election could literally be, and I don't mean to over-exaggerate, but it could literally be the difference between whether or not Donald Trump dies in jail or dies a free man. Truly. He has every reason to want to win this campaign and to want to make sure the data is right. So I don't think, he's just wasting time, money, energy in New York. I think there was a purpose he went there. One final thing, again, I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole into the polls that came out today, but just to, prove the point in the larger picture, this is Nate Silver's latest forecast. You can see a drastic downturn based on the latest polls that have come in for former President Donald Trump. 51% probability of winning compared to Harris's 48.8%. Now, if we break this down further, Trump, according to Nate, if the election was held today, would get 265.5 electoral votes. Of course, 270 is needed to win, so Trump would fall short. Now, the reason Silver puts Trump with the higher electoral college probability is because he still factors in what those trend lines are doing. In other words, his model doesn't just use the raw polling data. If you want just the raw numbers without any manipulation, go to RCP, Real Clear Politics. Now, their manipulation is they choose what polls to include, but RCP was closer to the actual results, and we know that that's what the Trump campaign uses, closer than 538, and 538 is very bullish right now for Kamala Harris. As always, this is my commentary and analysis, and I'd love to know what you think down in the comments below. What do you think about what J.D. Vance said about Kamala Harris's internal polling numbers being worse than what is publicly shown? Do you think he's right, or do you think he's just trying to build confidence among the base? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you haven't already, please be sure to give me a thumbs up. I know it's a simple thing to ask, but it really does help me in the algorithm to reach more viewers like you. Be sure to smash that subscribe button and to check out one of these videos.